In the ancient political tradition, parties are the extreme, the superlative form of faction, and faction is understood to be intrinsically evil. All of political theory in the ancient world, it doesn't matter whether it's Platonic or Aristotelian or Roman or Greek, is all organized around the problem of preventing society from breaking up into antagonistic factions. We want a unity of sentiment, a unity of purpose which characterizes the good polis. Now, if we look back at history, we have good reason for believing that. Faction, party, leads to civil war in our understanding of history, or at least in the understanding of history characteristic of 18th century England. Look back at Thucydides' Peloponnesian Wars, right? The revolution at Corcyra, the civil wars that are detailed in there, all proceed from the breaking up of society into antagonistic factions who define their interest oppositely. A virtuous individual will be public-spirited, will have no separation of their interest from the interest of society as a whole. That's why the Platonic guardian class is not allowed to have their own family and is not allowed to have their own private property, because that would give them a special particular interest independent of the interest of the society as a whole. By reducing them to no other interests except the interest of the city as a whole, it prevents, at least in Plato's mind, the emergence of the guardians of the gold class as a faction with separate interests and a separate agenda independent of what's good for the society as a whole. Now, that idea that faction and party are intrinsically evil, a sign of disease within a society, and potentially which will potentially result in a civil war, which means, back to the state of nature, the war of all against all. This idea is taken up, that factions and parties are bad, and it comes right into political theory, and it goes at least as far as Hume. Hume is the first political thinker in his political essays. I think this is the essay on the ideal commonwealth where he brings this up. He kind of wants to allow for the idea of legitimate opposition, which is what parties do. They make it possible to focus and organize opposition to the government and to the dominant party. And at the same time, he wants to avoid the dangerous element of faction and party because he thinks it potentially could lead to civil war. The gist of it is something like this, that the idea of legitimate political parties, of a loyal opposition, of legitimate dissent, is a peculiarly modern idea. And Burke helps us legitimize that idea.